Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where I'm coming to you from another nice day at the park. It's very busy today here at the park because it's a national holiday and the park is kind of overrun with people and kids and out-of-town tourists who are coming to visit Tokyo. Life's kind of back to normal here. Yesterday I was looking at the numbers for our coronavirus news, and we had only 50 cases in the entire country of Japan yesterday. So since October 1st or November 1st, when the state of emergency was officially ended, things have gotten kind of better and better every day. And I think people now, at least here in Japan, are thinking that this pandemic is behind them or behind us, and I hope everyone is right. The hotels are getting booked up, the sporting events are getting full, everyone is back to work as normal, so things seem to be going pretty well here. Now the weather is getting cold, people are starting to get a little bit concerned, but this has been going on for, say, the past 2 or 3 weeks, yet the shorter days and cooling of the weather doesn't seem to be having any opposite effect on I guess, the decreasing number of cases. So we've got our fingers crossed here and holding our breath that it continues to keep going the way it's going and leave us behind. I had planned to make a video over the weekend about this camera, but it turned out to be quite a busy weekend. We were preparing for an event called Shichigo-san, which is something which is held for children in Japan on their 3rd, 5th, and 7th birthdays. Shichigo-san means 7, 5, and 3 in Japanese. Boys, they celebrate this when they are 5 years old, and they dress up in kimonos and stuff and pose with their family for photographs. Girls get 2 chances to go to Shichigo-san when they are 3 and 7 years old. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's kind of an expensive event here. It's kind of one of these traditional things which is kind of a good money-making endeavor for hotels and shrines and things like that. First, you have to rent the clothes for your kids to wear. You don't want to buy them because they're a good kimono and stuff are outrageously expensive to buy, and since kids grow quickly, you're not going to be able to use them for very long unless you have lots of kids. And the rental is quite high. A rental for 1 day for a kimono and all this stuff for your kid is quite a bit more expensive than buying a new suit for yourself to wear to the office. So. But despite the cost and the time and all that, we had a good day, and my daughter really enjoyed it. She got dressed up. It took about, her and my wife as well, it took about 2 hours to get the clothes put on and the hair and stuff done. And then photographs at the traditional gardens at the hotel, and then a trip to the nearby shrine to, I guess, get a blessing and to give a donation for good luck and healthy childhood and all that. And quite a busy weekend and busy day, but unfortunately this will probably be our last Shichigo-san, so it's kind of sad for that. It's nice to get it done, but on the other hand, kind of regret not being able to do it once more, twice more, however more kids a person can have more. If you're like my grandfather and his 11 brothers and sisters, it could be kind of a very long and an annual event. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started with the subject of today's video. This is going to be about a camera which a lot of people have asked me about over the last couple of years. This video is about the Olympus Pen W half-frame camera. The Olympus Pen W is kind of, I guess, the final variation of the classic Pen series, which was introduced in 1958. I made a video about the original pen, and rather than have you go back through all my videos to try to find it, I'll quickly tell you about it. The original pen was introduced in 1958 and designed by Yoshihisa Maitani, who was tasked by Olympus with coming up with an easy-to-make, high-quality, half-frame camera for a very low price which anyone could use. And he kind of hit a home run when he brought out the Olympus Pen, and it was a really popular seller, and it was one of the things that made Olympus a major manufacturer of cameras from that point on. The original pen was a half-frame camera identical to this one with a 2.8 centimeter f3.5 lens. This was improved to the Olympus Pen S, which featured a faster f2.8 lens and a more sophisticated shutter. And then there was this version here, which was the Olympus Pen W, which featured a more sophisticated 5-element E-Zuiko lens but with the f2.8 speed and the same more sophisticated shutter. The Olympus Pen W was kind of a gimmick more than anything else, and very, very few of these were built relative to the other pen cameras. These were somewhat more expensive, and people in those days, if they were going to spend their money on a half-frame camera, they might as well just get the regular S and not spring the extra money for the W. The S was already a really good camera, and the W was just seen as, I don't know, superfluous or maybe not worth the extra money. It looked more cool with the black paint. You could get an Olympus S model with the black paint, but those weren't popular, and Olympus sold very, very few of those. But when it came to the Olympus Pen W, it was available only in black. This camera kind of languished for a few years and was kind of just a, I don't know, trinket or gimmick or something. It didn't really become popular until it was used by the Japanese photographer Bunyo Ishikawa, who carried one of these during his time as a war correspondent in Vietnam. And some of the most famous photographs, a few of the most famous photographs of the war were taken by him and taken with this particular camera. And a lot of people got the idea that maybe this wasn't such a bad camera after all. And also, tools used by famous people tend to become popular with less famous people. And from that point onward, this camera became more in demand. And in recent years, as the price of pretty much everything has gone up, especially the rarer and harder to find cameras, this camera has gone up in value significantly. It was only a few years ago that these weren't all that hard to find, and I used to trade in them quite often in my online stores. But since then, the price has gotten kind of high, and a lot of people aren't willing, I guess the main market isn't willing to pay the price that these are getting. This is one of the few cameras which I think actually deserves the high price tag. First because of its rarity, and the second because of its performance. It really is an outstanding camera with a really good lens, and a very unique lens. This lens wasn't used in any other camera by Olympus. It was really kind of a unique thing. They made a 2.5 f3.5 lens for the Pen F SLR camera, but that was a completely different design and not as good as the one which comes in the Pen W. But there are a couple of caveats when it comes to regard to high prices on these cameras, especially if you're going to be actually shooting with them. The number one thing to keep an eye open for, especially if it's especially because of the rarity of this particular lens, is that the lens is in good condition. The lens on these cameras is kind of like the other Olympus Pen Ws, the glasses or pen models, all the regular Pen and the Pen S. The front glass is kind of soft, and it's not that difficult to scratch it when you're cleaning it. So make sure if you're buying one of these cameras that the front lens is clean. And second, they have an issue with haze between the rear elements. As I said, these have a 5-element lens instead of the 4-element lens which came on the regular pens, and the fifth element was cemented on in the back. And these lenses tend to separate in the back, causing haze in between the elements. For myself, I can fix the haze fairly easily by separating the rear lens element and then applying very clean lacquer to the original Canadian balsam cement, and then reaffixing the rear element and applying pressure to it. And this puts the rear element into place, gets rid of the haze, and makes it nice and clean again. However, it's kind of a difficult procedure, and it took me a little while before I could get it right. Several times I attempted this on the first lens, and finally I was able to get it to come out quite well. And fortunately, this camera hasn't required. This was one of the unusual examples which doesn't have any lens issues in it. Second issue that these cameras sometimes have is with the shutter. So the more sophisticated shutter was meant to be an improvement over the original Pen series. And instead of having a maximum speed of 1/200th of a second, you got 1/250th of a second, which isn't really a big significant improvement. And this significant improvement in the speed of the shutter came at the cost of reliability or accuracy. These shutters sometimes catch or run slow or stick or whatever, and even though they're not a really sophisticated shutter, they're kind of like a watch when it comes to working on them. It's very, very difficult to get them set up just right and to get them working just right. So if you're buying one of these lenses as a shooter or a collector, always make sure that the lens is in good condition and that the shutter is at least reasonably accurate. One final problem these cameras sometimes have is the mask for the bright line frame lines sometimes comes loose. It's held on with I guess a lacquer type of glue, which over the decades, these were made a long time ago, dries, and sometimes a shock to the camera can cause the mask to come loose. And if you look through the viewfinder, it's off to an angle or a little bit, or fuzzy on one side and clear on the other, then it's loose and has to be glued back into place. You have to make sure to get it back in the right place so when you shoot photographs with the camera that they're properly framed. The lens and shutter are not complete deal breakers. They do have an effect on the value of the lens. I had one of these cameras, my own personal camera, which I shot for a couple of years, and the lens had some marks on it, and the shutter suffered from occasional lagging from time to time, causing overexposed images. But the camera made so many good images that I kind of put up with that. And eventually I got to the point where I could get the shutter working better once I got some skill in repairing these after working on a lot of the Pen S models, and I was quite happy with it. If I were, when I got this camera, I was kind of tempted to keep it for myself and use it for shooting, but I just have too many cameras and not enough time, so I decided to go ahead and put this one on the market, and it's listed right now. Let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of the Olympus Pen W. Starting at the top here, we have the exact same film rewind knob, silver one, which comes on all the other early pens. We have a shoe for mounting your flash gun. There's a flash sink located on the front here for mounting your flash. We have the shutter release button here. And these have an especially soft and crisp shutter release. I really love it. It's like the camera is very quiet, much more quiet than the Leica, and the shutter button is much smoother, if you can believe that. Kind of like a polished trigger on a PSG-1 sniper rifle. And don't ask me how I know that. I've never fired a PSG-1 sniper rifle, maybe. And over here we have the film counter dial, which runs up to 72 and plus a little bit beyond. You can get up to about 76 exposures from a 36 exposure roll of film with one of these cameras, depending on how good you are at loading it. But it's not really an automatic rewinding film counter. When you load the film in it, you have to reset the counter manually. So when you're loading the film, make sure not to forget to reset the counter so you know how much film is left in the camera. And keep in mind that this runs backwards from other cameras. Most cameras will start from 0 and count upward. This one starts at the top number and counts downward to 0. So keep that in mind when you're setting it. On the back of the camera here, we have a really tiny viewfinder window. That's not really an issue on these cameras because this isn't a rangefinder or SLR camera. You don't do any focusing through the viewfinder. This is a scale focus camera where you just do the focus on the front. Despite its small size, this camera has a very, very good high quality optical viewfinder with projected bright line frame lines, which allows you to compose your image really accurately. And over here we have the film winding dial and shutter charging dial. The one issue that these cameras often have is the mechanism underneath, the timing and I guess locking pulse, and these things sometimes get stuck when the grease gets hard. Sometimes a few drops of lighter fluid put under the gear and allowed to seep in will unstick the mechanism and allow you to begin using the camera again. The best thing to do is, of course, take off the top cover and clean everything properly. See my video about overhauling the Olympus Pen camera if you want to see how to do that. Moving to the front of the camera, we have the important stuff here. First, we have this silver ring at the base, and this is the shutter speed ring, which gives you a range of shutters from bulb and 1/8 of a second all the way up to 100/250th of a second. In front of that, we have the focusing ring, and in the center here, we have the aperture ring. Some of these cameras come with filters on them, and though the filter is a wonderful item to have when you are trying to protect the lens, especially with these cameras with soft lenses, be careful not that the filter doesn't get stuck, because often I come across these cameras where the filter is permanently affixed, maybe from acids and stuff in the fingers getting around the end of the filter and then causing the filter ring to bind to the filter itself. You kind of have to break and cut off the filter to get it off. It just simply won't come out afterwards. And if you try to turn the ring too hard, it unscrews the lens assembly on the front. So when you're using a filter on one of these things, don't put it in too tight, and be careful not to let it, when you're moving the aperture, to get it stuck on. One thing I really like about this camera is its ability to take really good candid and street photography images. This seems to be a camera designed specifically for that purpose. It's compact, it's quiet, you can carry it in your pocket, you can get a lot of exposures on a single roll of film. It has an outstanding lens which is slightly wider angle, so you can get more of a subject onto your film. It's very smooth and quiet. It's almost noiseless to operate. And the scale focus system, believe it or not, if you know how to use this, it's much faster than focusing an SLR camera or rangefinder camera or even using an autofocus camera. We have a focusing scale here on the back, and this particular one, on these, all of them I guess are set in meters. And we have 3 settings on here. You have the infinity setting, which you get to by just turning it all the way to the end. Then we have a setting for 5 meters and then for 2 meters. Now the 5 meter setting is good for getting people standing together in a group. So 2 or 3 people, your friends there standing, want to pose for a photograph, that's fine. The 2 meter setting is good for getting a picture of someone standing up, their full body in the picture. From head to toe. I suppose if they're not too tall. Back in the early 60s, Japanese people were a little shorter than they are today. So maybe I might move it, say, a little bit further out if I were shooting taller people. But when you get used to where these detents are, you can quickly set the camera to the different focus points without even looking at it. If I'm shooting in conditions here, so say I'm using Kodak Tri-X and I'm here in the weeds at the park, I'll go ahead and set this, say, to the aperture to f8, and I'll set my shutter speed to, say, 1/60th of a second, and I'll preset my focus to the 2 meter length and wind the film, and pretty much I know what I'm going to be able to get on the frame, or how far away 2 meters is, so it makes it quite easy and fast to take a photograph. So really wonderful camera for candid or street photography. Let's take a look at the bottom of the camera here. We have a button here which you depress to rewind the film. We have a tripod socket, which accepts a standard 1/4-inch tripod socket, a standard 1/4-inch tripod socket. I should have mentioned this shutter button accepts a standard cable release. Here we have the mechanism for removing the film back, and like a lot of older Japanese 35mm cameras, rangefinder cameras, and a lot of Leica cameras, Nikon cameras, you have to remove something in order to load the film. So you take off the back, put it in your pocket or stick it under your arm. Drop your film canister here into this open area until it fits and the forks are down inside and it's fitting flush on the bottom. Pull your film meter across and feed it into the slot on the take-up spool. Trying to get my camera to focus here. And then simply wind and fire the shutter until the film is pulled across and the holes on the top and the bottom are engaging in the teeth here on the take-up sprocket. Once you have the film going, take your film door and put it close to the top like this and then shove it up into place and lock it. Make sure that you don't put it on down here and try to slide it up. It will go if there's no film in it, but if there is film in it, this pressure plate might catch on the film and push it off of the sprockets here, and then the film won't wind properly. So put it up close to the top, push it like so, turn it and lock it into place. Then the next thing you have to do is reset the film counter. So say I loaded a 36 exposure roll of film, I'll go ahead and set it up to say I'll just set it to 0 and I'll fire it a couple of times. And by the third one, I'm usually good to go and I can start taking photographs. So wonderful camera. As I said, I've got this camera listed for sale in my online store right now. I'm not sure how long it'll last. It's been maybe 3 years since I last had an Olympus Pen W for sale. I have no idea how long it's going to be before I get another one which has a good lens in it. I do plan to get a lot more cameras listed over the next few weeks as I get more and more in. So if you're looking for something in my stores and you don't see it, please check back. I'll get more. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.